Hi, Dave Coplin here, bringing you news of this week's show, which is actually not a live stream. It is instead a pre-recorded interview because I've been talking to David Price, who's the author of this fabulous book, The Power of Us. This book, for me, is essentially the closest thing we're going to get to a single textbook, a guidebook, a handbook, if you will, of all of the things that we need to consider and do as organizations, as leaders, if we're going to be successful in navigating the ambiguity that lies ahead of us. David's background is in education, but he presents a really broad overview of the kind of things we need to do. We go from culture to trust. We talk about leadership and skills, all of that stuff. But the focus is really around how do we create and curate people-led innovation in our organizations that essentially is the engine, the crucible by which we will navigate all of the chaos that is in store for us. It was a great conversation. I really, really hope you enjoy it. We also, this is a short edit of that version for the show, but also there is the full interview that's also available. I'll make the link available in the comments below. Really hope you enjoy it. Hey everybody, it's Dave Coplin here, bringing you another Rise of the Human special, dialing into the future of work. This week we have David Price, the author of this fabulous book, The Power of Us, which, having read it, I think is essentially the closest thing you're going to find to a handbook, a guidebook, if you will, that will help you navigate the chaos and ambiguity that lies ahead. I'm pleased to say we've got David with us right now in the studio. So David, welcome to the show and thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you, Dave, and thanks for having such a kind of well-referenced copy of the book. I love it when I see little Post-it notes stuck out.
Do you know what? It's a really recent thing for me. My wife was looking at me a couple of days ago as I was doing this, and she was like, who are you and what have you done with my husband? Because before, books were kind of like religious texts to me and you didn't mark them, you respected them. As I've got a bit older, I'd rather read and engage the book and get well into it rather than just leave it out. So it's now my hallmark is actually to, and even red pen. I mean, not that I'm correcting spelling mistakes, but I'm trying to find the bits that I want to get to quickly later in the day. So look, with that in mind, I'd love to know about the origins of the book. And in particularly, I also want to know, what's it like to be one of the oldest hipsters in Austin?
Well, the two things are connected. So I guess my first book was called Open, How We'll Work, Live and Learn in the Future. And, I used to be a musician and I thought, oh God, this is second album syndrome. That idea that you've said everything you needed to say in that first album or the first book. And so it took much longer than I expected it to do, but gradually a bunch of ideas started to form, and I was starting to look at what I was seeing around the world, because I was going around, lots of different countries and giving talks, and of course seeing the huge changes that politically and socially which had taken place over the last 5 years. And at some point I thought, I'm going to have to try and test these ideas out and see if it's just me. And I've been asked to speak at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, which is just one of my favorite places. Have you been, Dave?
No, I've never been lucky enough to go, actually.
Oh, it's great. It is the last. In some ways, it's kind of very hippie-ish, and in other ways, it's absolutely cutting edge. And for those people who might be watching this who aren't familiar with South by Southwest, it's a kind of Edinburgh festival in terms of its size, but it's about new ideas, new tech, new films. It is just a hipster's retreat, and they booked me into a room that held about 500 people, and I think I'd done a title like "Say Hello to Your New Best Friend: People-Powered Innovation," and that was kind of it. And about 3 minutes before I was due to go on, I said to my wife, "There's nobody here. No one is going to turn up." And I said, "Listen, if 10 people turn up, I will turn this into a book." And out of nowhere, 500 people just descended on the place. I guess it is like Edinburgh in that sense. They're constantly moving around, and suddenly they all arrived. And I said the same thing to them. I said, "Listen, I just want to try these ideas out. If it resonates at all, stick around afterwards and we'll talk." And about 120 people stuck around, and we had a great conversation. And people were kind of saying, "Yeah, I think you're onto something there." And then, of course, that's when the real work started, because I thought I need some case studies. I need to get, the frame of the book sorted out. And I thought I had that so that was 3 years ago when I went to South by Southwest. In February of this year, I kind of got what I thought was the final draft finished. I was in Australia at the time, And then, of course, COVID happened, and I had a publication date, but I also had a publisher who was just saying to me, you have to include this. You really have to include it. And I thought, yes, she's right, I do. So I kind of rewrote the whole thing over 3 weeks in March to April.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because I mean, I was going to say I had the same as you. I didn't have the same as you because I've been procrastinating writing a book for about 3 years. And when COVID hit, it really floored me because I thought, oh my God, because the book is no longer relevant. And I would have been, had I written it, I would have been ripping it up. What was that like? I mean, was it like a mountain of work? Were you lucky in the sense that actually a lot of the stuff you'd written about was still relevant? How did that process happen?
Yeah, well, I thought, here's an acid test of what I'm saying. Because what I could see, if you remember those first few weeks of lockdown in the UK, it was just crazy. 1,000 Facebook self-help groups sprung up overnight. Things like scrub hubs making PPE when the British government failed to deliver any. And so I thought, I'll take the case study organisations that I've looked at, and if they haven't pivoted at all, if they've done nothing different in the face of this pandemic, then there's a problem. But, they all had. And one of my case studies was Brewdog, and they were almost out of business, and they switched overnight from distilling gin to making hand sanitizers. Their delivery vans stopped delivering beer and started delivering meals to sheltered and vulnerable people. And so on. Almost all of those case study organizations had shifted in the light of COVID. So on the one hand, it was a ton of work, but on the other hand, it was the book that I just felt, this is never going to end, because something would happen every day. And one day my editor rang up and said, have you seen the news? And I said, no, what? And she said, there's a guy called George Floyd being murdered. You have to include it. And I thought, yeah, I do. But at what point do you say, that's it?
Yeah. No, that's got to be super tough. What I really liked, though, is, I liked a number of things, David, but in sort of, as you're laying out the case for why the book is relevant now, and also why COVID accentuates the need, you talked about these sort of 6 emergent trends that would really brought us to this point. And you also make the point, and actually, certainly from my perspective, I'm absolutely inclined to agree with you that so much of what we're going through now was happening anyway. It's just that the virus has, made it far more significant or happen more quickly. But those 6 trends you were talking about were things like a crisis of identity, a sense of learned helplessness, the return of the artisan, the opening of knowledge, the dawn of scalable learning, and the quest for self-determination. This isn't a test, by the way, but I'd love it if you could just sort of walk us through some of those trends and some of the ideas behind the thinking, because I think it really lays out the context of where we're then going to go, which is really about what we can do with some of those things.
I would absolutely love to, Dave, because you are the only person so far in all of the interviews that I've given who's actually highlighted that chapter. And for me, it was kind of fundamental to it, because you have to see how we got to where we are.
Totally.
So thank you for raising that question. So crisis of identity, I think, as you say, this was already happening. We've had a society whereby you're judged by the work that you do, the job title that you have. When we talk to kids, we say, what do you want to be when you grow up? You go to a dinner party, you say, what do you do? And suddenly with artificial intelligence and automation, that's no longer the case. We have to face up to the fact that not everyone is going to be able to find a job. And so being defined by the work that we do seems to be wrong. It just doesn't seem to fit for the life that's coming up. Equally, though, one of those other trends that I noticed, which has really accelerated during COVID, is what I call the rise of the artisan. And I wasn't the first one to talk about this. Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England, talked about the coming artisanal economy. But, we were seeing a rise in craft breweries. We're seeing, everybody was making sourdough bread during lockdown. And just yesterday, I was listening to a Radio 4 program where they had a series of people who've lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic and have shifted to trying to make a living out of their hobbies. And one woman was selling cupcakes, another one was putting kits together for pottery. So there is this sense, I think, now that going forward, we should be identifying ourselves by what we can create, what we make, which may or may not lead to, a financial reward. But that's why I like the use of that word occupation now, because it's what we are occupied by, and for many people that's going to be different things. But it's a way of labeling yourself, which I think is less damning in the current scenario than simply your rank within an organization.
Yeah, no, totally. And look, I mean, excuse me, there's a big conversation I'd love to have with you. And we'll get to part of it today, but it is about how do we appropriately equip people for the future that they're going to inherit, specifically kids, but also us as well. But so those trends kind of set the scene. And there were just some other points of context that I thought were also really curious to me about why you would do it. One of them was you seem to be quite keen to make a distinction between users and customers and consumers. So users being really the focal point of the people who are at the heart of this. Where I come from, and this won't be a surprise to you, that there's only two types of people that talk about users, and it's drug dealers and computer programmers. And so I was quite interested on your perspective on why sort of this concept of being a user or being the focal point needed to be framed in that way.
Yeah, well, I think it is that shift, and this for me was it goes back to that South by Southwest presentation that I gave, because I said I felt like they'd been an overlooked group, and that's we have to get away from this notion of we produce stuff and then we find a market for it and we find people who are going to consume it, because the world just doesn't work like that anymore. And I started coming across all these crazy groups who were taking existing products and then hacking them, like IKEA hackers who will take IKEA furniture and then will throw that leaflet away and they'll make of it what they will, take a photograph of it and put it up. And IKEA's response to that, I think, went right to the heart of the dilemma and the need for a paradigm shift. Because initially they sent them a cease and desist letter and they said, you've got to stop doing this. And so all those, and by this time there's hundreds of thousands of people around the world, and they just said, okay, fine. We can hack anybody's furniture. We'll just buy someone else's. Is that what you want us to do? And IKEA, to their credit, said, okay. Yeah, what if we give you a part of our website? And then now they're actually starting to develop their first range of hackable furniture. I think we have to accept now that we've always had users. And before the Industrial Revolution, pretty much everything was as a result of user innovation, whether it was the farmer, making changes to the plow. But because of industrialization, we came to see the world in two very distinct groups. There are the producers, and then there are people who use that product or service that you produce. What I think I'm trying to say in the book is that those users also innovated, and 54% of all new inventions still today come from users themselves. So what do we want to do with that knowledge? Do we want to compete with them? Are we going to try to ignore that? Or, as in the case of my book, some of these organizations have said, work with us, let's co-create something together. And that, to me, seems to be the sensible, if not the only, response to this.
I totally agree. And it's funny because that leads me, you would talk later in the book about sort of if you want to sort of enable and make sort of people-led innovation possible, you talk about 8 key principles. You talk about trust and transparency, engagement and equity, autonomy and agency, and mastery and meaning. They're all brilliant, but I really want to talk about trust most of all, because to me, trust is the single most important building block to get all this right. And we see it in spades in a world of dispersed working, and back to that sort of empowerment style of leadership rather than micromanaging. What can leaders do to sort of grow, and not even just leaders, what can leaders and individuals do to grow and engender trust in the organization?
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that, because I agree with you. I think the other 7 don't really feature unless you've got that in place. And it is so hard. There is a knowing doing gap, it seems to me, with leaders about trust. They know, and because umpteen surveys have been done. They know that it is absolutely critical to the success of an organization. But they somehow can't bring themselves to do it. And when I was writing that section, I looked at a number of things, and I've also got a copy of the book with some bookmarks in it. And I cited two studies on this. One's by a guy called Paul Browning, and the other's Stephen Covey. And it was interesting to see the overlap in them. But it's things like, being able to admit mistakes. You have to give trust in order to get it. And I think people don't, they fundamentally have difficulty with that notion that, trust can't really be earned. It has to be given. And so you have to be in that position where you're giving trust to other people, and in return, they'll start to trust you.
Sorry, just on that, because I like that, because you specifically talked about the importance of vulnerability in a leader, yeah, which I think speaks exactly to that point, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And, I think we're starting to see some examples of that now, particularly in the kind of knowledge sector, where people are admitting that they've got it wrong, or that they're really worried. And, it's not that long ago that you couldn't really do that and keep your job as a leader.
Yeah, no, totally. Okay, I want to sort of, I guess, go to home territory for you, really, which is education and learning. And I guess I want to close later on, thinking about schools and universities. But right now, let's stay in the organisation and let's stay with sort of leaders. And it's funny because this has been something that comes up time and time in our conversations on this show, which is about the difference between skills and traits. So in a modern digital society, what becomes more important are these sort of core human principles, rather than the fact that I can code, in COBOL, or I know how to operate a certain kind of machinery. And in the book, you call out this as a difference between mindset and skill set. And I wondered if that was the same thing, or if one of you were going somewhere else with that.
No, I think it is the same thing. I think the phrase I use in the book is mindset will always beat skill set, because there just seem to be a number of examples of people who had done amazing things. One of the people I cited in the book is a woman called Andrea Coleman, who set up an organization called Riders for Health, an NGO in Africa. And it's ensuring that people in remote parts of Africa can get access to healthcare. And it happens to do it by motorcycle couriers. Either they're couriering test samples, or they're bringing medics out to remote villages. It just so happened that Andrea was a motorcycle fanatic all her life. When she was 19, she was racing motorcycles. She's 70 now and still doing it. And so I think if Andrea had been, a chemist, she would have been working on vaccines for Africa. So I think the skill set can be built around the available mindset that you've got. But without that mindset, you're going to be struggling. And we've seen lots of organizations who've put together what they thought was, a team of complementary talents, to find that they don't share the same mindset. And I think, given the rise in the spending power of millennials, that's really important that you get the mindset right, because now millennials want to know, what do you stand for, before they will buy your product or come and work for you.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think within that, there's this, it's almost becoming a cliche now, which it shouldn't, because it's crucial to this, is this concept of lifelong learning. But I don't know about you, and probably you more than me, because you've been in this bloody world. I feel like we've been talking about lifelong learning for ages, but doing bugger all about it. Do you know what I mean? And especially when it comes to organizations. So what do we need to do to make lifelong learning, everybody's expectation of how it works?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, when did I first hear that phrase? It's probably around the mid 1980s, and yet we still haven't structured it. And at that point, I was working in further education, and we thought, hurrah! People are talking about lifelong learning. That's our clientele. and yet there was no support. The
Yeah.
focus has always been upon, well, obviously schools, but universities. And I think people like Tony Blair didn't help when he said we want 50% of people to get to university. And you think, well, why? What's so great about that university experience? Of course, what we're seeing now is that disruption, which is happening all over the world, is also happening in the higher education sector. So universities are being challenged like never before, and they are having to think about the need to develop lifelong learning. But I have to say, Dave, frankly, in this country, they're not really getting that leadership from the government. What was interesting when I was looking at case study organisations was I went out to Dubai, and they've now completely rethought their education and training philosophy, so that they have a series of entitlements. If you're a young person, why should you be stuck in one school? Why couldn't you choose to do arts in one school and science in another? But also, why couldn't you get your hobbies recognised? If you were really good at athletics, then you should have time in order to do that. But crucially, what they also say is we need a different kind of micro credentialing, which understands that you're going to, in your life, you're not going to stop at 21. You're not going to be done with education. You're going to keep having to learn and relearn and unlearn. And therefore, they've made this commitment to lifelong learning genuinely, and much more flexible forms of assessment and accreditation. Because it seems to me one of the issues around lifelong learning is, if we've got a structure which we still have, which is clunky and out of date, it has to be validated by organizations. And I worked alongside a university, and I tried to get a program through, and they said, we want to know what you're going to be doing in 5 years' time. I said, I work in the performing arts industry. We don't know what we're going to be doing in 5 months' time.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So we've got to get much better at how we accredit it. Although, frankly, I think the tech and the knowledge sector is driving this anyway, because you've got more and more people like Google who are saying, not interested in what you know. Show us what you can do with what you know. And that applies whether you're 50 or 60. I think the only point I would make about Google, since I've always been a Google fan, in fact, I had shares until quite recently, is they don't look at diversity sufficiently well within their organization. So the vast majority, and you could tell me if this was the case at Microsoft, the vast majority of people, I visited Google's headquarters in Sydney, and I didn't see anybody who was either younger than 30 or older than 45. And I think that's a shame, because we're now starting to see, on one end of that, we're seeing this concept of kind of reverse mentorship. What can we learn from young millennials coming into the company? But one of the organizations that I cite is called Sparks and Honey, and they've set up this, what they call experienced internships for people who've possibly even retired, but they've got this wealth of experience.
Yeah.
We want to bring that back within the organization.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And do you think that's the opportunity then? And, so as an organization and as a leader, coming to the end of the book, is the right action, the best action, to be an active and vocal part in wanting to make that happen, empowering those people to be, autonomous, to have agency, to master the things that they do, and to be, to create an environment where that becomes possible. Do you think that's the legacy, if you like, of the book?
I think it's the only option. When you think about the wealth inequality gap that we've currently got, that's not sustainable. We can build those gated communities, but at some point, people are going to climb over those fences. If we allow this to continue, then so even in our own self-interest, it would make sense to actually work with those young people to help them, just to give them a little nudge. I'm doing a talk next week, and I came across this young 15-year-old, and I meet these people regularly. She's in a school in Bogota, in Colombia. She's invented this amazing, it's a kind of igloo, but it's obviously it's made out of lightweight plastic material, and it's easily transportable. It sleeps 2 or 3 people with a little kitchen. The whole thing can just fold up, and it's for when there are, natural disasters and people have lost their home. She's done all that as a school project, and she's taken it to the United Nations. And I said, well, you're going to come on this talk with me, and we're going to find you some philanthropists who put some money into this, because this is what we have to do, is to say to these young people, tell us your ideas and help us fix the world, because the challenges that are coming down the pipe in 20 or 30 years, I'm not going to be around, but these young people are going to have to fix climate change. They're going to have to find a solution to mass migration, and it goes on. So unless we nurture their skills and talents and give them the autonomy to be able to fix these wicked problems, then I'm not sure that we have a future.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, and I would go, I was going to say I could go further, but I think you're on the same page as me. I think it's our duty of care. I think, our generation, people of our age, we are the guardians of the future that our kids are going to inherit. And if we give them, we're already handing them this steaming pile of, climate change and economic disparity. And if we also, as part of that package, choose not to give them the skills that they're going to need to solve those problems, I think we're derelict in our duty. And so that has to be for me, and that's why I love the book, because not only do you lay this stuff out, you also give us some pretty clear guidance as organizational leaders, as organizations, and as individuals, for everything that we can do to make that future that positive future happen, such that our kids are equipped with the right skills and the right kind of ambition and the right kind of moral and philosophical guidance to deliver the world that we all need.
Absolutely. That's wonderful.
Well, I had a good teacher actually in this, so that was very, very good. So listen, David, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us and taking us through the book. It's a really, really fantastic read, and I'll certainly write some more about it, and I'll be posting this on the interview. So thanks so much for joining us, David.
Thank you, Dave. Take care.
So thanks, everybody. That's it pretty much for this week. It's been a fantastic conversation. I really recommend, I think The Power of Us is, as I called it out, I think it's a great handbook, a guidebook, if you will, that will help you and your organization navigate through the chaos that lies ahead. That's pretty much it for this week. We'll be back next week. We'd love to see you all again. Thanks so much for joining. If you've enjoyed the conversation, as always, we would love to get your subscription, your like. If you haven't enjoyed the conversation, then let us know. Don't let us do this in silence. We'd love to talk to you. We'd love to hear more from you. Thanks so much, and we will see you all again next week.
There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioner's future. This is just one of them.